I have always looked at fan reactions, whether they be fully supportive or negative or aggressive or whatever they may be, as passion. Fans are just passionate. I'm a fan. I'm the most annoying guy on set because I'm saying, excuse me, you do realize that this should be happening and they wouldn't do that, and you haven't read this, that means this would be impossible. And everyone's just going, Henry, just shut up and do the thing. And I'm like, I don't want to do the thing because he wouldn't do it this way, and he can do it.
It started with a trailer, a simple 2-minute glimpse of what was supposed to be the grand return of one of Netflix's biggest fantasy franchises. But within hours, it became clear this wasn't a celebration. It was a funeral. The Witcher Season 4 trailer dropped, and the internet erupted into chaos. Fans didn't just dislike it, they rejected it. Hashtags like #NotMyGeralt flooded social media. Reaction videos turned into digital protests.
It certainly didn't go well for Netflix or for The Witcher when they debuted the teaser trailer for Season 4, giving people their first look at Liam Hemsworth taking over the role for Henry Cavill. You could see by that ratio it didn't go well. 140,000 dislikes to 28,000 likes. Comments full of people just blasting it to pieces, talking about why Henry Cavill left. And of course, the reason Henry Cavill left is because the show went in a completely different direction.
And in less than 24 hours, what should have been a triumph for Netflix turned into one of the most controversial releases in the platform's history. But this wasn't just about a casting change or a bad trailer. No, this was the result of years of tension, creative differences, and a brewing war between passion and profit. At the center of it all stood one man, Henry Cavill.
The man that had such love for this franchise that after production was over, he would go home and still stay in costume. The man that was described by his co-stars as a living, breathing Witcher Bible. Even the actors behind the character of Yennefer said that he knows more than anyone about the world of The Witcher and all the rules and regulations and the terms in Witcher knowledge. He's up there. And now he is gone. The Henry Cavill, Geralt of Rivia era has come to an end after 3 seasons, and now we are entering into the Liam Hemsworth era, which is only going to be lasting about 2, as the show is coming to a close after Season 5.
And the studio that thought it could replace him. What unfolded wasn't just a fan backlash. It was a rebellion that exposed the cracks inside one of entertainment's most lead actor. It lost its soul. And while the trailer was being dissected frame by frame online, few realized that the real drama had started long before this moment, behind closed doors, in meetings that would change the show forever. Rewind to 2022. Henry Cavill's departure shocked the industry. Officially, Netflix called it a creative handover, but insiders knew that phrase hid something much deeper. Cavill had grown increasingly frustrated with the show's writing. As a lifelong fan of The Witcher books and games, he reportedly pushed for more faithfulness to Andrzej Sapkowski's world.
The Watcher before you, The Witcher.
The Witcher,
before
yeah.
you started.
I hadn't seen the TV show, and I hadn't read the book.
And you have a sense that you're going, is this really necessary?
Writers, however, had other plans, turning the show into something broader, easier to market, and more Netflix-friendly. That tension eventually reached a breaking point. Cavill's commitment to the lore clashed with the studio's vision for accessibility. While he wanted to honor the story's roots, executives wanted to modernize it for wider appeal. According to one insider, Cavill was often seen bringing notes, quoting passages from the books, something that frustrated members of the production team. When he finally walked away, many assumed it was just creative fatigue. But now, looking back, it feels more like a prophecy, a man who saw the iceberg long before the ship hit it. And when Season 4's trailer dropped, fans realized he'd been right all along. The foundation had cracked. Netflix had ignored its own warning signs. The breaking point didn't happen on a set, or during a fight scene, or in some grand argument with directors. It happened in silence, inside a private meeting room on Netflix's main campus. Only a handful of people were there, But what unfolded that day would echo across the entire franchise. Henry Cavill walked in calm, composed, and deliberate, the same way Geralt of Rivia might step into a battlefield he didn't want, but couldn't avoid. Across the table sat Ted Sarandos, Netflix's co-CEO, and a few top executives. On paper, it was just creative check-in, but in reality, it was the final conversation between passion and profit. For months, tensions had been simmering between Cavill and the writers. He wasn't just an actor reading lines. He was a lifelong fan of The Witcher, someone who had spent years immersed in its lore long before Hollywood came calling. To him, Geralt wasn't a character. He was a responsibility, a promise to fans who loved this world as much as he did. But the studio saw things differently. They wanted modernization, accessibility, and what one insider allegedly called brand expansion. To Cavill, that meant sacrificing the heart of the story for convenience. He reportedly brought notes to meetings, challenging changes that broke character arcs or contradicted the source material. Some writers appreciated it, others didn't. The tension grew. When he entered that room, Cavill already knew what he had to say. He spoke respectfully but firmly about creative integrity, about how The Witcher strength wasn't in flashy effects or broad appeal, but in its authenticity. He reportedly said, "The moment we start treating this world like content instead of a story, we've already lost." Sarandos listened, nods, polite acknowledgements, corporate calm. He explained the pressure the company faced, the demand for faster seasons, global metrics, and simplified storylines for new viewers. Cavill didn't argue. He just paused for a moment, then quietly replied, "But that's not what fans fell in love with." That silence hung heavy. In that instant, both men knew this was the end. Cavill had reached the line he couldn't cross, the point where staying would mean betraying what he believed in. He reportedly stood, shook Sarandos's hand, and ended the conversation with one final statement. Progress doesn't mean replacing passion with profit. There were no outbursts, no threats, just quiet resolve. He walked out the same way he came in, leaving behind the role that had defined his career. But what he didn't realize was that the story of that meeting would travel farther than any episode he'd ever filmed. When details of the conversation leaked months later, fans didn't see him as difficult or demanding. They saw him as a guardian, the last man in Hollywood who still cared about the details that made stories great. Reddit threads called him the White Wolf of integrity. YouTube essays analyzed every quote. Even journalists who had once doubted him began describing the moment as a quiet act of rebellion. Inside Netflix, the tone was different. What was supposed to be a small creative disagreement had become a PR nightmare waiting to happen. The studio had underestimated the emotional connection fans had with Cavill. And worse, they had underestimated how much they trusted him over them. By the time the trailer for Season 4 dropped, this moment had already transformed into myth. To the audience, it wasn't just that Henry Cavill left The Witcher. It was that Netflix had lost the one person who truly understood it. And from that point forward, the story was no longer about The Witcher. It was about a battle between storytelling and corporate storytelling. A battle one man quietly chose to walk away from. The internet turned Henry Cavill into a symbol. What began as disappointment evolved into defiance. Hashtags like "Bring Back Henry" and "Cavill Covenant" dominated timelines. Fan-made posters flooded Reddit, depicting Cavill as a martyr of storytelling. Petitions gained hundreds of thousands of signatures, demanding Netflix reverse its decision. But what stood out wasn't the anger. It was the unity. Fans from around the world, many who had never even interacted before, banded together in defense of creative authenticity. Deepfake clips showed Cavill reinserted into new Witcher scenes, edited by passionate fans who refused to let go. Within days, the Backlash had transformed into something far more powerful, a movement. The irony? Netflix. Attempt to move forward had brought the entire franchise backward. Critics started calling it the beginning of the end, while others labeled it a masterclass in misunderstanding your own audience. But even as the chaos escalated, Netflix remained silent, unaware that silence in this storm was the loudest mistake they could make. Behind the scenes, Netflix scrambled. Executives held emergency meetings to assess the damage. Comments on official posts were being deleted, dislike counts hidden, and attempts made to redirect fan attention toward new storylines and fresh perspectives. But nothing worked. The audience wasn't buying it. Then came the infamous PR statement, one that claimed Cavill had given his personal blessing to Liam Hemsworth's casting. The internet didn't believe it for a second. Within hours, the statement was dissected, fact-checked, and memed into oblivion. Journalists began reporting on internal chaos, conflicting messages, frustrated showrunners, and declining investor confidence. For the first time, Netflix faced something it couldn't control, a cultural backlash that money couldn't silence. And while the studio's PR team tried to patch the leaks, Cavill remained silent. No interviews, no statements, just quiet confidence. Ironically, that silence became louder than any corporate response. To fans, it said everything, while Netflix tried to patch the holes in its sinking ship. Henry Cavill was already sailing toward a new horizon. He didn't post angry statements, he didn't fuel the drama, and he didn't throw shade. He did something far more powerful. He disappeared. For months, there were no interviews, no public comments, nothing but silence. But that silence carried weight. It wasn't absence, it was intent. Behind the scenes, Cavill was working, quietly, meticulously, on projects that aligned with the principles that had driven him all along: authenticity, respect for story, and love for lore. It wasn't long before rumors started to swirl. Some claimed he'd partnered with Amazon for a major adaptation of Warhammer 40K, his lifelong passion. Others whispered that he was developing a fantasy world of his own, one not bound by studio bureaucracy. And then, one day he reappeared, not on a red carpet or talk show, but in a short announcement video, smiling, calm, and focused, revealing that Warhammer 40K was officially in production. And he was not just starring in it, but executive producing it. The internet exploded. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a declaration. Cavill was taking control of his own narrative. Fans flooded social media with support. He didn't lose The Witcher, one post read. He graduated from it. Others called him the last of the purists, a title he never asked for but fully embodied. Unlike so many actors chasing trends, Cavill had become a symbol of something rarer: consistency. He believed in what he loved, and he never apologized for it. Clips from his old interviews began resurfacing, small, quiet moments that now felt prophetic. One in particular went viral. Cavill, sitting in a press interview, humbly explaining how he'd always been a gamer, how he read the Witcher books before the show, how the lore matters. Back then, it was a charming detail. Now it felt like a mission statement. But what made this arc so powerful wasn't just professional redemption. It was philosophical. In a culture that often rewards compromise, Cavill had shown that staying true to yourself could still lead to success. He wasn't bitter about The Witcher. He was grateful, because that experience had proved what he'd always suspected, that passion isn't a weakness in Hollywood. It's the only armor that lasts. Meanwhile, Netflix's attempts to revive The Witcher's image seemed hollow. The more they promoted Season 4, the more people compared it to Cavill's dedication. Fans noticed the difference, not just in performance, but in energy. Cavill's Geralt felt lived in, layered, and human. The new version felt scripted, manufactured. The internet's verdict was clear. You can replace the actor, but you can't replace the soul he brought with him. Even critics who had once been skeptical of Cavill's intensity began to see it differently. One entertainment journalist wrote, "Henry Cavill didn't just play Geralt. He carried the torch for every fan who ever loved something enough to fight for it." That sentiment spread like wildfire. Soon, people began calling Cavill a one-man franchise. He didn't need Netflix anymore. He had something far more powerful, a loyal audience that followed him because they trusted him. Not the algorithm, not the marketing, him. And perhaps the most poetic twist, the very principles Netflix dismissed him for. His obsession with accuracy, his commitment to story, his refusal to cut corners, became the foundation of his next chapter. Reports suggested that on his new sets, he was deeply involved in work, building, script details, even costume design. To many, he wasn't just an actor anymore. He was a guardian of creative truth. By the time Netflix finally released Season 4, the conversation had already moved on. While their viewership slipped, Cavill's projects trended globally before even premiering. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. One man building something real, while a corporation tried to resuscitate something artificial. And through it all, Cavill never gloated, never mocked, never retaliated. His quiet professionalism became its own statement. In an industry obsessed with noise, he let his work speak for him. And in doing so, he reminded everyone of a truth as old as storytelling itself, that genuine passion doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just needs to last. Henry Cavill's redemption wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about return, not to The Witcher, but to himself. To the kid who painted Warhammer figurines in his room, to the fan who loved the worlds he stepped into, and to the storyteller who believed that integrity isn't negotiable, no matter how big the paycheck. Because in the end, the legend of The Witcher wasn't defined by the monster hunter with two swords. It was defined by the man who refused to let Hollywood slay what made him human. As Backlash continued, rumors began circulating, whispers that Cavill might collaborate with CD Projekt Red, the studio behind The Witcher games. Reports claimed there had been early discussions about a live-action adaptation more faithful to the original material. Nothing confirmed, of course, but fans ran with it. Speculation videos, tweets, and fan theories flooded timelines. Some claimed Netflix might even attempt a redemption move, a limited series or cameo return to unite the fandom. Others suggested Cavill would never go back, that he'd closed that chapter. But the very fact that people still hoped said everything, because what started as anger had evolved into a deep desire for something real again. Cavill had become more than Geralt. He'd become the embodiment of a principle Hollywood had forgotten, that the audience can forgive failure, but not betrayal. And as more rumors surfaced, one question echoed across the internet. Could the White Wolf rise again? In the end, The Witcher Season 4 will be remembered not for its visuals or cast, but for what it exposed. The growing divide between corporations and the audiences that built them. Netflix didn't just lose an actor, it lost the trust of a global community that once believed in its vision. Henry Cavill, on the other hand, walked away with something the studio couldn't buy: respect. His legacy now extends beyond one character. He became proof that passion still matters, that authenticity still resonates, and that no amount of algorithms can manufacture heart. The Witcher was always about destiny, and perhaps this was his. Because in a world driven by views and profit margins, Henry Cavill reminded everyone of a truth Netflix forgot. when you stop listening to the people who care most, your story stops being yours to tell. And that was the moment Netflix learned what every legend eventually does. You can't replace the white wolf.